Okay, should be good.
Yes, we are good.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Nick.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, Nick. How are you?
Okay, I think we may start, and hopefully David will join the session later.
Okay. I'll share. Oh, should I start?
So one of the initial ideas for connecting this project to its unique context involved reimagining or reinventing the porch and shutter position. These shutters are all taken from homes in New Orleans. Developing on ideas of context.
Okay. Hi, my name is Jamie Sullivan, and I'm a second-year undergrad in Andrea Bardon section. The title of the intentional housing community is Active Village. Active Village fosters community through activity and a grid of circulation that connects the urban block and the neighborhood at large. The project focuses on recreational activity and indoor-outdoor living through balconies, sports, and green spaces that keep people active outside and therefore engage with the community. Building typologies adhere to the strategy proposed by the grid to allow a public corridor of recreation facilities between two private corridors for living. The horizontal home sought to explore the relationship between public and private, the more outdoor, lighter public side, and a more compact private bedroom area. The vertical home attempts to once again apply the public versus private dichotomy, but this time a vertical scale. And the sectional home is essentially a combination of the two previous homes, still exploring private and public living. For my side observation, I noticed New Orleans is an old city and is still dense enough to be walkable, but how do you promote walkability and at the same time activity through a new intentional housing community? As you can see from this diagram, there's still some public courts in the area, but they either aren't well kept or have no integration into the larger neighborhood, requiring people to get to them by car. The building site is in a good location to serve as a nexus between local parks, as the design allows for easy access and emphasizes biking and walking. This resident was a good example on how to achieve high density, and the proposed design seeks to emulate the modern aesthetic and the vertical core. But this project was also inspired by Traumhaus's attempt to respond to modern suburbia in this grid of pathways. The houses adhere to major arterial pathways along defined axes. It may seem like an obvious precedent for everyone, but Jane Jacobs' ideas were driving design philosophy on how to design an intentional community that foster community through sidewalk contacts, clear separation of public versus private, etc. And it really reflects the village part of Active Village. This was the project's main inspiration. Zermatt and many similar European towns are extremely self-contained. There's a strong sense of community due to the aforementioned design choices. With those precedents in mind, the main ideas are high density, meaning walkability and bike lanes in order to move away from our reliance on the automobile, and activity and recreation. Green terraces and sports fields/courts promote a healthy lifestyle and sidewalk contacts. A focus on activity promotes community with the entire neighborhood. As mentioned previously, public versus private has been a core concept in the previous homes, so this project seeks to investigate that dichotomy on a broader scale. If you divide the block evenly into thirds, you can start to see major axes and corridors forming. However, in order to fit regulation-sized courts and still have room for pathways, the grid had to be modified. Within the private sphere of life, there are ground floor amenities for both private residents and public visitors. On the left is the existing condition for vegetation and green space, and on the right is the proposed. Starting to zoom in more now, you can start to see more specific programming in the two major axes that guide the design. This diagram starts to culminate many of the concepts stated in the previous diagrams, including the shifting grid and the public and private corridors. Before I get into the actual floor plan, these two typologies make up the massing of the intentional community, which I'll go into more detail in a moment. Zooming in now, you can see the more specific programming. For typology A, you can see the cafe lobby, laundry, bike storage, and co-working space. For type B, you can see the first of 2 floors. This section cuts through the public access, which is the pool, or access, sorry, which is the pool, tennis court, and the basketball court, looking north. Here's a perspective from those concrete blocks that serve as more visually opaque bleachers. The diagram on the left shows the total public circulation, including the sidewalk, while the diagram on the right shows the main grid and arterial pathways. As stated before, the design started with an even grid along center corridors, but was then shifted to incorporate a full regulation-sized tennis and basketball court and a recreational pool. Then tributary pathways were added to create the total circulation. This diagram builds off the previous diagram, but this time including the circulation in each typology and the vertical cores. This diagram also helps to visually explain the placement strategies of these two typologies. Typology A takes up more surface area and is therefore able to block the opposite ends of the block that are voids. Typology B's vertical cores are attached to the existing buildings, ensuring an open public corridor. This is just a perspective showing the entrance into the community from Bardon Street. This is the plan showing the first floor above the ground floor. This depicts the actual units of type A and the second floor of type B. So once again, this diagram shows the two typologies that make up the community. As I stated before, typology A was placed at opposite ends of the block, and typology B's vertical cores were attached to the existing buildings, ensuring space for a public corridor. Zooming in some more, this is typology A. It's a dormitory style meant for younger athletes who seek to live together. It's inspired by the horizontal home. The ground floor houses both public and private amenities. There's 12 units per building for a total of 24 large units in the community. These diagrams explain vertical cores, bathrooms, balconies, public versus private dichotomy, and bedrooms. Typology B features more private loft-style units, is inspired by the vertical and sectional homes. It's important to note that type B has 2 distinct units, a small unit and a medium unit. They both have 2 floors. And there are 4 small units and 4 medium units in each building. These diagrams explain similar diagrams in type A. This section is from north to south, cutting through the tennis court. And this section shows the same experiential qualities, but from west to east, cutting through the bike storage in the southern type A. This perspective shows type B balcony looking onto the tennis court. And this animated axon shows kind of the thought process behind the design. I can get through that again. Oh, okay. And yeah, that's the end. There are 64 units in total.
Wendy, we cannot hear you.
I was just going to say, Ruben and I are in a stare off. Who has to talk first? Hi, Jamie. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing well. How are you?
My alums. It's good to see you. Can you go to your ground floor plan?
I can't.
I mean, I might have missed it, but the big thing on my mind before I can really start giving you my sense of this and feedback is to understand a little bit better, you know, the particular organization of the block. You know, what is the structure that's organizing the block? I mean, I understand that you sort of said, oh, I'm going to split it into thirds, you know, but I have a question already. I'm like, why thirds? does that align with, you know, is it really just 33%, a third of this area, or does it designate it seems to designate the central third of the block, but why that third? And then what's driving the kind of the 2 towers, why you have 2 different kinds, you know, a bar shape and so I'm just looking for more like how you presented it as
right.
Like, this is how I got there, but I really don't understand how you got there. So if you could just help us a little more understand what drove some of these decisions.
I started off with like this kind of recreation corridor in the center, and I was kind of, the hardest part of this project was kind of figuring out how the strategies, the kind of rules that place the buildings wherever they're placed. So I, the help of a professor, or Andrea, kind of zoomed out and realized, okay, on a broader scale, it's public versus private. So you need to have room for that corridor and kind of have these centralized communal spaces, but how do you organize the buildings? And I thought, okay, this type A kind of formed its own corridor of public versus private and like this ground floor amenities, while type B is like attached and kind of growing out of the existing buildings. Therefore, you kind of get those three like distinct corridors.
Well, I certainly understand the, you know, a big issue for this project for everyone is gradations of public to private and understanding the best way and the best kinds of space to foster public life, social life, communal life in the city of New Orleans. Most of that, you know, it's more than most places. You showed your diagram that shows kind of parks, and obviously we have two huge parks, but in terms of integrated parks and playgrounds, there are fewer than you might expect, you know, in a city that's covers such a large area, but is actually not very dense. You know, it actually is almost suburban in nature for most of it, outside of, for most of the city area outside of the French Quarter. But I would say, you know, like my read would be, well, we saw a lot of projects this morning. So, you know, it's impossible for me not to think of the series of kind of approaches and trying to figure out where you fit into that. Some of the approaches really pushed the built form as much as possible to the perimeter and, you know, put the buildings, in other words, and some kind of mediating device, whether it's a continuous loggia for market spaces or whatever. There were a number of projects in different ways that hugged the edge and then reserved the center of the block as this public space, this public shared recreational space of various kinds. Other people kind of broke the block really clearly either into like a 4 square or a 9 square, and then placed the individual buildings in such a way to create several different outdoor spaces. And I guess I'm just, what I'm responding to, and I won't ask you again, because I think you've answered as well as you're going to answer, you know, why the stripe down the middle is a good idea. Is it relate to anything outside of the block? I mean, I'm looking at in the site plan below on, is that Bardon? The lower street?
Mm-hmm.
You got already this quite big, I don't know what that looks like, some sort of athletic field or running track or something. I'm wondering, had you ever considered using that as a generator, or you wanted to stay with, anyway. What I do read into your plan is a kind of a latent, not a really super obvious, but a kind of a latent division into 4 quadrants. Meaning you have 4 kind of chunks of buildings. You established those 2 corners with the cruciform shaped towers, and then you have the 2 other opposing corners with this series of, you know, orthogonal, more rectilinear bar buildings. And I guess I think it might have made the kind of relationship between your idea about the housing towers and your idea about the site work together a little bit if that was more explicit. In other words, rather than just having a swath in the middle, you know, that maybe, you know, you have 2 swaths that kind of intersect, and you actually literally create a kind of a 4-part block in a much kind of maybe overt fashion. I don't know. I mean, we can talk about all the qualities of your project. I think there are many really, really interesting things going on. By the way, I loved your early housing studies. I thought some of them were quite beautiful and beautifully drawn, really expressive. But I'm having, you know, I'm going to let Ruben have a crack at it. Ruben, excuse me, to get my accent in the right place. Because maybe he's brighter than me, so maybe he understands a little bit better the diagram that you're intending at the site and how you're using that to deploy these different types of buildings. And then we can come back to.
Okay, I will jump in that case. James, I think that the scheme, seeing again the diagrams that you have brought, the general scheme is kind of clear, no? You just brought this central element that is well, dividing and unifying at the same time, no? Both sides of the plot, no? That is what you are trying also to do by placing there some common elements and also, well, with how you connect also with these paths, no? That in general, no? Then also this integration of these two different typologies of building, no? I think that is clear and it's smart, no? The square ones where you just work with one typology, and then these other kind of cross, no, ones, so I don't know how you call them. I think that they are both also very clear, no, and with intelligent movement from the previous project to this one. No, I think that in that case everything is kind of clear. No, and again I think that well, I will also congratulate you by the plan of the star one. No, this kind of cross. Sorry, no, not star. This kind of cross plan, because at the end, especially in plan, I think that is in terms of composition is kind of nice. No, is very interesting also how you just try also to create different mini courtyards, no, between these wings also, that somehow you are starting even in some areas to how can I say, foster as part of these public spaces, no, but in others, at least in plan, I can only see that there are just some trees and some, you know, green spaces, and maybe to one idea could have been just to even stress more those spaces also as part of the public space, not maybe at the same level of the central band, you know, but also as a kind of courtyard, let's say internal courtyard, no, backyard for each of these towers, no, because at the end you're just kind of creating those elements, no. Maybe the ones that they are facing the streets can be as also a kind of gate, so it can be also a kind of transitional spaces from the exterior to the interior, from the exterior to the terrace, and then the others one that they are, the other two that they're on the back part, they can be also, well, a little bit more related with a more private situation, something closer to the things that you have behind. No, that I think that at least the internal ones I can see. No, when you are just subdividing that piece and you are allowing, well, I think that there are like a coffee shop or something like that. No, that you are just trying to promote it. So I think that that is also appropriate. No, for that position. I'm just trying to say that stressing a little bit more that idea that we can only see maybe behind also on the frontal part, and maybe
Right.
even in those sides, because you are treating like both parts of that wing of the you know, I don't know if you are on concept board, but these both
Okay.
parts are more or less treated as the same. Oh, sorry, let me just draw here because maybe, okay, it will be better. No worries, no worries, no
Oh,
worries.
okay.
I will draw here, sorry. I was just working more in the other part because I can go back and forth. I was just mentioning about this. No, I think that these elements are very appropriate, no, because are kind of related with what we can see here. I was just talking also about the elements that there are in the frontal part. In this case, you have just 3. In this case, you have just 2. That they are, you can use them as these transitional elements, not that for the whole proposal. While these parts are more related with this one, no. But at the end, you are kind of treating this as a unique element, and then this is only as a vegetation. And I think that maybe as something more or something that you can explore in a further moment to elaborate those things a little bit more and to give more diversity. I think that it will be also nice to show more, to attract even more people from the exterior to the interior, no, to that part, and also using these frontal plazas, well, for a smoother transition between the exterior and the interior is what I try then to say.
That's a good point. Thank you.
Then also, I would like to ask about a couple of things that I don't understand. For example, this element. What is this element? It was a previous element. No, that is
recreational pool. That little building is kind of sort of just to prevent people from running off the street. It's kind of a check-in blocker area, a little shaded part.
Because when I saw your views, I thought that there were some resistance that they were there, especially in the first view that you have shown with this tennis court that in front of that it has like something. So I thought that it was something like that. So I'm not sure if your idea of creating this kind of public element, this kind of public line, it couldn't be even more radical if everything that you have here is built but with micro topography, no? So digging more than stacking on top of the horizontal line, no? So all the vision that you will have always, it will be more continuous in both sides. I don't know if that's why I asked if you wanted just maybe to close to that side because of some reasons, or maybe that pavilion that you need, maybe you should include on some of these buildings or some of these other more built situation that you have maybe on the terraces, and that will, sorry, on the towers, and that will, towers I mean by the cross buildings, and in that case you can add maybe some diversity or something. But again,
I thought about I was playing back and forth with the idea of excavating those courts and just having like kind of like a Zermatt precedent, but I just opted against it. I thought the rain might kind of collect in those spaces. That was a good point.
Well, in that act, I mean, I was talking more than to build a ground and an underground level. It could have been just a kind of microtopography where you just work a little bit with that, but not with one floor. Is what I meant, no? By that, no? I don't know how much you can just dig, but also now that you just mentioned, maybe you could do from a problem, from a weakness, a strength, no? And maybe you really dig this kind of course, maybe 3 feet or something like that, and then those elements could have been to gather, to collect water from all this area, and then just to keep that there, and then just to throw to the system of the city. No, we can find something like that from in other places, like for example in Netherlands, it's very common also to double use these kind of spaces, not for recreational but also for infrastructural issues, and I think that could be also appropriate. And then just my last comment, and I will leave just time for Wendy. It's like everything is kind of very clear, especially when you show the composition. And this is again maybe a minor thing or maybe not, no, but it was kind of clear the grid that you have below, but it's not. I don't know why it's not everything kind of aligned, no, because it seems like you tend to align everything, but in some cases it's not aligned, but just for a bit, no, not for too much, no. So I don't know if that was on purpose, just to give a little bit of
I tried to align it as much as possible, but without shrinking any of the courts or I don't know, you have to kind of adjust throughout the existing houses. I kind of had to modify and shift the grid. I tried to keep it as aligned as possible, but there were a couple of spots I couldn't.
Well, I've just been to try to kind of better, hopefully, explain what I'm saying about, wanting to understand a little bit more why two cruciform buildings, not just a whole wall. Why do you need two types of buildings? If you do need two kinds of buildings, why are they where they are? Why is the public, those kinds of things. I mean, I took the liberty, if you'll indulge me, you can scroll down to your, you had another plan. Well, it's on the concept board, actually. Can you switch to that?
Oh yeah, I can. Sorry.
So if you see where I'm scribbling.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So I have mixed feelings about this cruciform thing. As a building, the way that you're deploying it in a kind of an open park setting, it is extremely reminiscent in a somewhat uncomfortable way to a lot of those failed public housing projects in the United States and New York City and so forth. That had, mainly in New York City, I'm thinking more, there's several different ones that were just perceived as being really, not fostering life for the community. They seemed kind of alienating, et cetera. And then they've gotten, this isn't my opinion, this has been written about, on and on and on. So, there is a little bit of an association to that. And I don't know if you had time to study in the course, there's a lot you had to learn, but both positive and negative examples of public housing or collective housing, because there certainly are both. And we can learn as much in a way from the failed attempts as the positive ones, what to avoid. And I'm not saying that your towers would not be successful. I don't know, but there is a kind of, for me, especially having lived in New York, I'm from there, and knowing the kind of stigma about some of those cruciform towers, it's just impossible for me not to go, I'm not sure. But I love the idea of kind of zoning the larger block in a kind of a cruciform manner that would yield these 4 quadrants. And so I was trying to think about how in the bigger picture, you might use your building mass. So in this kind of little sketch, I'm imagining your building mass being this kind of aqua, it's sort of a cattywampus cross, because I'm trying to keep some of the spaces that you've already arranged. The light orange are the existing buildings that everybody has to deal with somehow. And then the dark orange, is where I'm sort of saying that probably it's kind of like I'm using them a little bit like you're using that little pool enclosure to think about, is there something that you could have, another kind of building or kind of covered exterior space, whether it's people have used market stalls, but it could also be actual commercial space on the ground floor.
Wendy, I'm sorry for interrupting. Just saying that I have to move to the next room. It's a couple of minutes left. So
that's fine.
You have a couple of minutes. So by the time the other teaching comes, you can continue. Just to say bye and thank you so much both of them.
You're welcome. And I'm
for
sorry.
the comments.
I'm just
no. That's perfect. It's me that has to move, and I wanted to say bye.
But I think often, urban public spaces, you have the right instinct, I think, in putting that little pool structure. They tend to be more successful when they have a clear boundary, even if it's a low boundary and you can see over it. So I was sort of suggesting that you might, that the existing buildings provide kind of part of that enclosure to the block where they exist. And your buildings provide some of that enclosure where they exist. But sometimes you need something more to actually enclose those major public spaces. So it's just it's another way of thinking about the use of this kind of cruciform organization, not as an object like the building placed in space, but as a tool to subdivide the block. So I don't know. I mean, I'm really in favor of your units. I'm not really clear. I mean, Ruben said your site plan is clear, the building, it's clear, but I'm not clear on why it is the way it is, I guess is where I'm going.
Right. I really enjoyed your drawing, because sometimes it is easy to get so locked into this is how I do it, when you take a step back, wow, I can do so much more with it. Yeah, that's the pieces that
I think you have all the right pieces, and I think it's interesting to have such a strong, two very strongly different kind of tower or housing typologies. I mean, because This is the first time I've seen that. Usually everybody sort of has an approach to the housing building. They might have more than one, but they're all, you know, kind of much more similar to each other, part of one larger building that's broken up. And so, I mean, I definitely think it's interesting to attempt something different. And it's a full block, so you certainly have the room to do that. I just wonder if there was a way to use that idea, that diagram of a cross, and use it to actually organize the space of the block in a way that was a little bit more tied to some of the existing conditions. So anyway, it's just a thought. It's just a thought.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Wendy.
Hi, Guillermo.
Hi.
Are we moving on now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you,
so
Jamie.
much.
Also, and thank you for being the timekeeper.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
Great work, Jamie.
So now we'll have Chris. You can use Control L to have the full screen mode.
Sorry, I was unmuted. Here, let me go back real quick.
If not, you can go to View and full screen mode.
Okay.
Perfect.
Can you hear me okay? Can you see everything?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Hi, my name is Chris Kulik, and I'm a second-year undergraduate student. Okay. Wait, is my slides? Wait. Okay, there we go. Sorry. I named this project Collective Courtyard not only because of the interior courtyard spaces within my buildings, but also the exterior courtyard beyond the buildings in the center of the site. Here's my isometric. When first designing my collective community, I analyzed the successes of my designs from my vertical, horizontal, and sectional homes, as well as my southern porch analysis on Palmer Street. My horizontal home was where I got my inspiration for designing the array of courtyards within the community. The home was designed for 5 students and features a courtyard in the central design, much like Japanese housing. By doing this, it emphasizes the idea of collective housing while still having communal spaces and private spaces around the perimeter. As for my vertical home, it taught me how I could design a vertical core and build up. And for my sectional home plays with double height and varying height spaces, and it taught me how I can effectively design spaces around a vertical core. And then finally, for my southern porch analysis, I studied the outdoor, how New Orleans was so prominent to have the outdoor spaces, which are largely collective. When analyzing the site, I took note of many elements in the existing neighborhood. It was very important that I did not change too much, but that I still made something new of it. And some things I noted was that the average height of the existing buildings was about 1 to 2 stories. And in the northeast area of the block, the trees were quite tall. So I kept that in mind when designing. The intentional community I envision are young and middle-aged families who are environmentally conscious and want a area to live in with an array of outdoor spaces. When I was observing the site, I saw a lot of young people and couples when I was there, especially around the coffee shop, and there's the school nearby, so I thought that would be a good community, or a good intentional community. So here's my isometric again. And here are two diagrams, one showing the proposed vegetation and another showing the circulation in the entries. I decided to organize the walkways and orient the building so that it was still inviting to the public and that it wasn't too closed off, so people could walk in and out and experience the central part of the community. And also I decided to have two commercial spaces on the north and east side, or on the north and south side, one being a green market with healthy options and the other being a restaurant. And then a large part of my design is rooted, as I mentioned earlier, in my interior courtyards. So having a strategic way to provide light and heat the building and cool the building effectively was important to me. I came up with a system that can be adjusted seasonally to be environmentally conscious and conserve energy. What I designed was what I envisioned to be a polycarbonate dome that has windows around the perimeter that can be open and closed for ventilation, depending on what months. In temperate months and in summer months, they would be open for ventilation, and in winter months, they would be closed, and there would be a greenhouse gas effect, which would hopefully conserve, or hopefully make it so that less heat and energy was used. And then in the summer, it would get hot, but I envisioned that you would put a cover on top to stop a lot of the sunlight from getting in. And I was considering leaving it open, but in New Orleans, the rain is very much of a, during the summer months, it's like a lot of rain can get in the building and not be good. So I wanted to protect against that. So let's see here. Here are the ground floor, the second floor, and the third level. Here are my sections here. As I talked about earlier, I played a little bit with the sectional home that I had talked about. So I do have a double height unit, which is my large unit, and then the grocery store and the restaurant are varying height from the regular building as well. Here's my other section, and you can see in the central building how I have those windows that kind of open it. And when talking about my typologies, I have three different cores. One is features the dome and courtyard system. The courtyard and dome system I talked about earlier. This has two entrances, one on the north and one on the south side. And it has 12 medium units, 2 small units and 1 large unit. For my typology B, it's similar in that it also has that polycarbonate dome structure I talked about above, but this typology has different units in it. This focuses more on having small units, so there are 14 small units and 2 large units in this one.
Chris, I'm sorry, but you need to go a little faster because you're already taking up the 7 minutes. So try to wrap up in one more minute.
Okay, yeah.
Thank you, sorry.
And then for my, for typology C, I also have small units in this, but I don't have a courtyard in this Well, I don't have a central courtyard like I do the others. I focus sectionally on the courtyard with the buffers that I will talk about in a second. So just here's my small typology. Here's my medium. And here's my large, which is double height. And here are my perspectives here. This is of the interior courtyard that would have the dome on the top. And as you can see on the right, there are buffers there that are a way to give privacy to the units. Also, it's a way to have windows on the inside so that people don't like look in, but it's still, I wanted to include that to provide more light. Here's another exterior perspective. And then also, I wanted to, when thinking about materiality, I thought that what I should do is use existing wood, like reclaimed wood from around the site, to also be environmentally friendly, and also to stylistically be similar to the existing neighborhood. Thank you. I have a total of 70 units.
Thank you very much, Chris. And welcome, David.
Hello.
Thank you very much for.
Sorry, I'm late. I got a little mixed up with the time zones and the like, so I apologize for being late.
No, it's okay. It's okay. We're really grateful that you can come and take the time. So, David, Ruben, and Wendy, you have the floor. Thank you.
David, welcome. Nice to see you again.
Hi, Ruben. How are you?
Do you want to go to maybe your site plan or ground floor plan or something, Chris?
Mm-hmm. Here's my ground floor plan.
Yeah, I mean, you had me at the beginning with the courtyard idea, although I must admit, I have questions about the internalized atria in our climate. I mean, if we were in Minnesota, that might make more sense to me, or North Dakota or something, but I mean, being too cold is not really something we have to worry about 99% of the time here. And maybe I say that as a New Englander who's relocated, you know, but it never gets that cold, but boy, it gets hot. And, you know, the idea of the ovens inside those, this must have come up in various reviews and critiques and so forth. So maybe you debated the pros and cons and just decided to go with this. But unless, you know, those things are actually generating energy somehow, I just think they'd be much better spaces if they were open. And I guess I also wonder, you did mention a lot of considerations about, you know, sustainability and smart building in that way. And just wonder if in any of these courtyards, the kind of the one, I hesitate to call it a courtyard because it doesn't really feel like it's bounded on all four sides, but the big collective gathering space and then the smaller atria, you know, if there's any idea about water retention or storage in big storms, is that something that you took into, that you considered at all at any point for these outdoor spaces, or spaces?
As in to collect water or to prevent it?
Yes.
Which one? Sorry.
I mean, you know, water retention, you know, just to kind of to deal with water runoff in big storms and lots of rain in a short period of time to prevent flooding.
I haven't specifically, well, I mean, the large reason why I have my dome is so that I can, you know, because if I just have it open, you know, I don't think that'd be good. I was focusing more on my actual project, the runoff part of it. But I mean, that is definitely something to consider. But I guess the extent I thought about was having the courtyard covered. But I haven't thought about you know, a specific runoff system. No.
Well, I mean, the kind of one of the really early prototypes for courtyard houses. It's not multiple unit housing buildings, but for houses is the Roman courtyard house, and there were similar versions in Greece and all over the world really. But at the center of the house was always an open courtyard, and in the center of that courtyard was often a cistern to kind of hold rainwater, presumably for use, but also again to deal with runoff and prevent flooding of the indoor spaces. So I think I think you're onto something, but I'm wondering if whether the typology that you chose, which is a potent one and very familiar to many architects, that you're setting up a certain expectation for, kind of water coming into, for that being an open space that, that would aid with ventilation, but it would also aid with, kind of collecting water runoff, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then you're denying that expectation by putting the roof over it. So I'm sure you have your reasons, and maybe I'm just not understanding them, but I like to think of your project is better to me if those are open spaces. And then I wonder, what is the function of this space here? I just have endless questions. Why is it shaped the way it is? What do you anticipate? What are people going to do there that they wouldn't necessarily do in the other courtyards? It seems to be built up as a little hillock.
Yeah, it is.
So
I wanted to do that because most of my project is, very right angled. And I thought it'd be nice to have a central area that you can, kind of walk around and not be so angular.
So again, I apologize again for being late, and I didn't hear all of your presentation. So forgive me if I'm not fully informed. But one of the things that, in just looking at this right off the bat, what I think is interesting. I mean, I think the courtyard is a really interesting typology for housing. But what I think that it does, and what I'm curious to kind of understand what your sensibilities are about. You're really creating this in the courtyard typology. You're really creating an opportunity to create community amongst the people that live in these buildings, right? And while what I see there is you kind of got front doors there. I think there's a real opportunity. I'd like to understand what you think about that space as being a place where you are, and then what is the collective courtyard of all of the buildings, and how does that create an even larger portion of a place for communal activities to happen, right? I mean, that's what those spaces are for. You're bringing these tenants together and these people in these buildings, and you are creating a community. And I believe the architecture has the opportunity to emphasize that communal living. And it seems like you got front doors on the courtyard, and you have some balconies and things that are on the perimeter of the building, which, there's also the need for private open space as well. But I'm interested to kind of get more of your sense of what your thought is on how your strategies are emphasizing or not, or what your thoughts are about that.
Well, for the on the topic of the porches, that was something that I was considering, because like at the moment I only have two, and here I'll go to, they're in, I don't know, can you see my cursor by chance?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, so you have this one here and this one here that are on the second floor, but besides that, none of them directly look towards the middle. That was something I was debating, whether or not I wanted to have the units look towards the middle. But I don't know, I just decided that I don't know. I felt like either they should be more private or that they should face the street, like in many New Orleans, style porches where the collective faces the street.
I do agree that they may be very different in your typologies, like the ones that face the street, and then the ones that face the courtyard, and then there's also the internal courtyards that you've created. Right. So I'm thinking on a much more global layer on the way you're thinking about you creating this community here with these housing blocks. So That's kind of what I'm thinking about. Like, because I think that you can have various strategies on the way these things relate to themselves or relate to the site, relate to the rest of the community and things like that. I think those are, there doesn't have to be one singular strategy for sure.
Right. Yeah, definitely. That's a good point.
Chris, I would like to start by saying that I appreciate in this case again how you presented two different ways of buildings. Now this longitudinal and then this courtyard was. No, I think that well, that is always a good sign of bringing some variety for both, maybe. For the external spaces and maybe something that you should have stress a little bit more are also the internal. No, that's to explain that more, the differentiation between the different elements. So what is the difference of living on the longitudinal one versus the other one? Why should I would like to live in one rather than in the other? No. Right now, it seems that the only difference is that one is kind of facing the exterior and the others are not facing exterior spaces, but not always. So, and then also the units are kind of similar, if I am right. So
yeah.
That could have been just something, not just to add and to include. No. Then also I would like just to, I agree with Wendy that courtyard. Well, I have also my doubts on the dome that we are also talking about the dome. I don't know if it will be more than a light element that you can open and it will give maybe shadow if you want. Also, I would control a little bit maybe the rain, but you can open as much as you can, because what we want is also to ventilate a lot also here. No, I think that for the humidity, no, and I think that will be also something important. Then also about the dome, I think that maybe you haven't brought any axle or anything, so I'm not sure about how that geometry will be, but that is a kind of secondary thing, maybe just the name that you just mentioned like that, no? But I also would like to say that then when we go to these courtyard buildings, that I think that they have some good points, no, in those buildings, no, especially these kind of common spaces that you are trying to build there, and I will like to suggest that maybe what you could have think is how we can stress a little bit more that idea, no, in terms of giving also more diversity to the whole building. In terms of that, those common spaces seem like more or less they are always on the same position. They are always more or less with the same dimension, with the same volume. Why not those public elements can change along the plans, no? Right. And in some cases, maybe there are just double height. So in that case, you don't have different kind of common areas, no? Some of them more private, some of them more public, which are, well, bigger in terms of volume, so you can have a kind of cinema. In some of them, they are smaller, so it's better just to read. In some of them, you know, it can be just kind of different. And also it will give you the opportunity to move a little bit more the houses, to have maybe more variety on the houses, more differentiation of the houses, and of course in the section and also in the facades. That will help you too, because right now it seems like, especially with the balconies, that the balconies, I think that it will be very easy if you just start to move and to add some also movement also on the balconies, no? Yeah. It will, and then also I think that it will help you to root a little bit more the buildings on the specific environment, no? Somehow I can see, for example, in this volume, that one of the most interesting sides, I think that it can be this one, no? Because, well, you have just the street, no? I don't know if you can see my mouse. you can see just the street, no? And here you don't have maybe houses. While when at the same time you have a lot of houses here that they are almost facing.
Right.
I don't know how far are these other party walls, but they are almost there, no? So you are, and also it's happening something similar here in this position, no?
Yeah.
So maybe just changing, rotating, or playing, thinking a little bit more on these spaces, how they can be, and in some cases you can just change. They can be longer, they can be higher, they can be. So it will help you maybe to animate, to move a little bit more and give more, diversity in both cases into the common spaces, into the houses, and also, and also in terms of facades, no, and also to relate more with the different elements, no, and in somehow also, and that will be just my last comment. Also here, not trying to relate more also some of these spaces more to this other, because at the end this is your core of the community. You have like internal cores, that there are these courtyards, but then also this one is the element that is connecting, no, it's attaching, it's bonding, no, the different elements, no. So it's also, I would say that I would suggest that this element is so important that more than just a geometry, you should have thought on what Wendy was saying, know how you can push people there to make that a kind of important element, as the courtyards are on each building, no?
Yeah.
Or maybe not. I mean, what I'm thinking is I'm really intrigued both by David's comments about, is it internally focused? Is it externally focused? Why would it be one or the other? Can it really do both? Or is that just a kind of a sign of an unwillingness to kind of throw your weight behind one way or another in a more prominent way? And I'm also really intrigued and completely agree with Ruben's comments about, couldn't these things, there are actually asymmetrically kind of portions of your site on this block due to the fact that you have these 3 existing buildings that you have to keep and contend with.
Right.
And so I was very intrigued by Ruben's comments about, do all the courtyards sort of have to be kind of the same size and character? And that got me thinking, because I'm frankly not really persuaded that this space is important to you, just based on what you've done with it so far. And when you have a series of courtyard buildings, it does kind of beg the question, are these things then in kind of competition with each other? So one thought I had, and I also, I didn't mention it, but I really like your idea of the commercial space as sort of an edge to the block. But I'm wondering now, what would happen if you actually gave yourself more room for these courtyards and just had paths between them? And that would mean that your courtyard, the kind of courtyard in the courtyard buildings, they could be positioned in different places. They could hug different sides, right? They could be different types of proportions. And you could actually pack that commercial ground floor program just on the first floor of the courtyard building, right? Of this one. Here, it really actually, it does make sense, because you're not going to be, it's too long and thin of a remainder to the site to be able to fit in the courtyard. So that commercial building just as a standalone makes perfect sense to me. But I'm actually interested in maybe you taking, for your 3 courtyards to really more fully claim the site, so that to give you more room to make those internal spaces, of different characters. And then you could maybe address some of David's comments too, like maybe you have 3 of them. So maybe one of them is much more inwardly focused, and you maximize the size of that interior courtyard, right? And then some of them are more about, yes, there's the internal courtyard to let in light and air, but it's maybe more of a light and a light well, and most of your public spaces around the perimeter with that. So I think there's you, like I said, you're playing with a very, very potent, promising, typology. And I think that, I'm glad you did. And I hope that you, through this process, have started to see, wow, there's so many different ways that I can throw this thing. And I think you're at the beginning of showing us the different ways that you can do it. But I think actually increasing the variety within that basic typology is a really exciting idea.
Yeah,
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, Chris. Do you want to say something?
Oh, well, I was just going to quickly say, you mentioning how like moving the courtyards around, not in the center. That's that's something that I wish I would have thought of earlier, because I don't know. I guess I just kind of stuck with it from the beginning, and I don't know. Sometimes you can't look from the outside. I don't know. But
Yeah, no,
that's a very good point. So thank you.
I understand it. You know, that happens.
Yeah, well, your main courtyard of the whole site isn't in the center of the site either.
Right.
So
Yeah,
there's no, I mean, you can break those rules
Yeah.
really easily.
Mhm.
And that opens up a lot of different opportunities of the way these things can connect together. But for the next study, I guess.
Right.
Thank you very much. We don't have much time, but we, of course, will prefer to continue talking, but I have to move on. So the next instructor is coming in, and I'll see you in a bit. Thank you, Chris, and thank you all, the reviewers.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
I have a question. Is there a pinup board like there was yesterday, Ruben, where you can kind of look at, is there anything like that so that it?
Oh yeah, I'll throw that in the chat. Do you not have the link?
I don't have the link to that. Okay, so the concept board allows me to kind of go through the project on my own as well as well.
Yeah.
Yes, and if you hit Control F or Command F if you're on a Mac and type the student's name, it will direct you right to their location.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you.
So we're joined by Fiona. Fiona, are you all set?
I am ready. I'm going to share my screen. All right, can you see my screen? Can you hear me okay?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, awesome. So hi everyone, my name is Fiona Alacantri and I am a second-year undergraduate student, and my professor this semester was Carrie Norman. So this collective housing proposal demonstrates the fluidity of pocket parks through a schematic linear opening block concept, which you can see, you can begin to see in this 45-degree axonometric, alongside the notion of how an irregularly shaped construct can dictate scale and eventual program of the generated spaces. So the horizontal home designed earlier in the semester was used most for the inspiration of this project. The idea of fluidity throughout the exterior forms of the construct, almost like a city grid, was what led the collective housing proposal to have openings on the ground floor plan and allow for a dynamic experience, not only for the residents, but for neighborhood passersby. So ideas from the vertical and sectional project were echoed in their elevational programmatic qualities, as in these projects a significant amount of time was spent creating and analyzing the public versus private aspects that floor levels can have. So for example, on the right, the sectional home alternated floors by public living space on the bottom level with private sleeping quarters above. This idea was then mimicked in the pocket park scheme, as the ground floor is completely public, housing shops and galleries, while the construct above is solely private for residents. So some site observations that were made in the research part of this project was noticing how many pocket parks exist in the New Orleans area. So seen in red is our site's block, while the green highlights some of the city's major pocket parks. In an effort to restore nature on the city block and continue that notion across the city, this scheme implied it as an open public amenity. So the precedent for the initial geometry was Enrique Morales' sketches and plan, such as this one, which helped to establish those pocketed green spaces and provide a distinct variation in scale, which further implied their program. So the initial shape of this construct was made porous after observing the positive qualities that I mentioned of the horizontal home, and by adding curves to the construct began to funnel people throughout the space and imply an experience. So then hardscape was established to lead people in and out of the block, and also to activate all sides of B block. And then I also analyzed the various paths one might take when traveling throughout the space. This diagram further emphasizes that idea of a completely open and public block and starts to establish the potential programs of the interior spaces as they relate to the pocket parks. Some of those programs relate directly to their adjacent pocket parks, such as the daycare seen in the top left of this ground floor plan. A public music venue in the middle park responds to the larger scale green space that the construct generates. In this perspective, you begin to see how one might be drawn into the park in a natural way, and how semi-private spaces such as terraces cut out from the building and can be used solely by residents, so a semi-private space. You can also start to imagine how the larger parks might be multifunctional and change with the neighborhood. Additionally, seen on the left, the cores of the buildings extend down to the ground but change in materiality to glass cubes to offer a distinction of these spaces. So a later iteration offered a new aspect of the typical residential floor plan in which a brise-soleil condition was implemented to create an indoor and outdoor sense of living, as well as imposing a more mosaic-like facade. So in this perspective, you can see how outdoor life can start to coexist with the interior, as well as how the brise-soleil works within the hallways of the building, as well as in the distance you can see on the occupiable private rooftop. This third plan shows the second floor of all the units, as the units are duplex conditions to maintain a thin construct and plan. And there are 60 units with 3 unit types, 18 of them being small-sized units, the majority being this medium-sized unit with 36 counts across the project, and 6 of these larger units, which are oversized due to their location along the curved crochet. This section furthers that idea of the necessary duplex units and the public greenery rooftop, as well as how I mentioned before of the glass box cores that extend to the bottom and act as very light and delicate offsets to the heavy concrete facade. So I'm just gonna unshare really quickly and share my animation so you can see how the project is clarifying that ideas that I talked about with the pocket parks and how they relate to the construct, as well as the greater city block. Yeah. There we go. So this idea you can further see in the axon again. So yeah, thank you so much.
I don't know about others, but it's good to start with the site plan or the ground floor plan, I think.
Yeah, sure. I'm good with the ground floor plan. Go.
Well, I'm certainly a huge fan of Enrique Morales also, Anna. And while I'm too sort of rationalist of a designer to attempt something quite like this, I admire the kind of the attempt. I wonder if there couldn't be some more of a kind of a happy medium between the actual or a reconciliation or a resolution of the geometry of the block and the existing buildings that you have to work with in the street and the street frontage, and all of which we've talked about all day, very, very important to communal and social life in New Orleans, and this shape that you're making. And so for example, I'm going to try to draw in Zoom just because that way we don't have to switch to concept board, but I'm wondering if this piece could have started with frontage to the street and you kind of zoom around and you grab that piece, and maybe then it's broken by the existing building, and then you kind of continue and sort of do more like what you have in mind here. I'm sorry, I can't draw all that well in the Zoom annotation, but something like that would give you, and obviously that's a very inelegant shape right now because of the way that I'm drawing, but I'm wondering if there couldn't be a little bit more of a best of both worlds where, you know, I mean, what I've noticed about Enrique Morales' work, and I don't know that the project you showed very well, but I'm very familiar with the cemetery that he did, the Igualada Cemetery. And, you know, there are multiple kind of complex curves, diagonals, triangular shaped spaces, and they're fragments of kind of larger shapes or forms that kind of resolve themselves together somehow. It's just kind of magical the way that he does it, and weaves them into each other and weaves them into the external site. And I feel like there's a kind of there's just sort of an insistence and a static quality to the Z shape that doesn't reach to reconcile and kind of be in a dialogue with some of the other pieces. So that's just my take. I'm a very, you know, urban first kind of architect. So, you know, take it with a grain of salt. But I do think, just based on what you thought you were wanting to achieve with the curvilinear form, I think you could still achieve that and be, in my mind, at least from my point of view, kind of more responsible to the urban frontages, and kind of the engagement with the street, and actually having some places that are clearly like fully open to the street, you know, which you have anyway, right? And then, but then some places that are somewhat more protected for the residents and more kind of internalized by the building. So you'd have kind of two of those and one that's really thrown to the street. Otherwise, I think just about anybody could access just about any of these exterior areas in your project right now. And I think it might be nice to have a graded range of public to private, you know, how shared are they? So, I mean, I don't have any quibbles with your programming or even your basic ideas. I do think that they're, you know, and again, this is, I admit this is my bias a little bit, but I think a little bit more acceptance, engagement, resolution with the existing conditions of this urban territory would have actually made the project even stronger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just to respond to that, I had actually never worked with like any kind of curved construct before. And initially my design of the building was extremely tall because it's such a thin building.
So squeezing it in there, that was
so it was very tall, and when looking at it in Axon especially, it just would never, like, it just looks so strange. So by adding that building on the side, I did try to have it relate to those 3 existing buildings, because the building that I had completely did not. So yeah, that was like something that I definitely was thinking about, but also struggling with in the beginning stages as well. So yeah, that you said that.
Yeah, that's actually a great answer, and it makes a lot of sense. And it's almost as if you're saying, well, I had this long, 2 tall building, and I squished it all into like an accordion into the middle of the site. But I still think you could have these lower wings that are kind of actually more integrated, but that kind of reconcile that kind of accordion tower with the kind of street frontage. But I hear you. That's an excellent response.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I would say, to Wendy's point too, there's actually sometimes more rigor involved in doing something like this than there is otherwise, because you know, you have a lot more you know, defined reasoning as to why you're doing what you're doing, and why you're weaving it in, and why you chose the angles you did, and so on and so forth. So what I think is, I mean, I really appreciate the sort of play on this in the way it's really about, I like the kind of creation of positive and negative space that you have here, and then the way that's kind of creating some new, very interesting spaces there. The challenge I'm having is with your last explanation. I'm struggling with the scale of this thing in relationship to the rest of the buildings and the neighborhood. Frankly, it's a big building, and I wonder, you kind of went to such lengths to really kind of weave this thing through and do all these different things, but then it's like one singular height, and you kind of haven't taken that into elevation. So I want to kind of see you take some of these strategies that you're talking about and start to look at it both in section and in elevation to continue that theme, but also then I think be able to, and I'm forgive me if I'm not totally up to speed on what the program that you guys are working with, so the density of this and so on. So you may have been struggling to get a certain number of units in here. So I apologize if I don't know that, but I will say that like there's a density here of scale, I think, that I'm concerned about, and what that kind of, how that relates to these other buildings and what those spaces feel like. So if there was some ability to kind of modulate that, where maybe in the center is where it got taller, but as it kind of reached back down to the street and those street elevations, it became a little bit more of that residential scale around, maybe that would be some help. But I think your strategies that you were using are really very interesting, creating some interesting opportunities here. I'd just like to see them explored at the next level in elevation and section.
Okay, I actually didn't mention that in my presentation, but there are exactly 60 units. So that was the the minimum requirement. But yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Can you maybe flip to the axon so we can see some of that three-dimensionality a little bit more? Yeah. I mean, it's tall, but it's not that much taller than some of the other schemes I've seen.
Yeah. What's the height of your building?
Yeah, so that would be, it's around 80 feet.
How many floors?
So the ground floor is a little bit taller because that's like all the public spaces. So it would be 5 floors. Yeah, so it's 2 duplex floors and then the ground floor.
I mean, this came up in the morning session. I think it was Guillermo who said that, you know, everybody's making these super tall. They're assuming that the ground floors have to be super tall, but depending on what they are and the size that they are in plan, not necessarily so. So if you're struggling to, you know, kind of keep the height down, I bet if it's 5 floors, you could easily bring it down to 70, if not, you know, instead of 80, or maybe even 65, you know, depending on what the structure is and so forth. But
yeah, and it may not be that scale is so bad at all. It's just that maybe it just needs to find a way to modulate itself. Like, you know, maybe there just needs to be some, I think that's what I'm responding to, is that it's all the same height. And I know that you're working with the density issue of number of units, but then is there some way to modulate that so that it does have a change of relationship as it moves through the site to both the street, to itself, and then to the other buildings in the surrounding community? So just a thought.
Yona, in my case, I first of all, I think that I would like to, well, I appreciate this, the strong signal that you are just provoking with the building, no? In general, especially in plan, no? I think that is kind of very bold movement and kind of, well, interesting interpretation from Miralles, no? Let's say, in general. But I have been also thinking on the, I'm not sure if it's just the scale of the building or the shape of the building or also the density of the building. No, I understand that you have just this minimum number of apartments, and I was also thinking on that, no? And maybe something that it can help you to reduce this kind of power sign that is, is kind of a little bit disturbing. It could be just if you start to use, in some cases, maybe this 6th floor that somehow you are using, no? Because at the end, our feeling is not only 5 floors that you mentioned, but also this kind of element. So if maybe just adding some apartments in some places while keeping in some others just this terrace could allow you to have also some other areas with a lower maybe, so you can just balance. It's what I'm trying also to do, no? Removing some from some places so you can have a closer maybe scale with the houses or with the persistence that you have, but at the same time, you don't lose some of these well, this number of buildings, no? And also continuing with the idea of Wendy, of trying to connect, because this sign is very powerful, no? And also in your plans, I was seeing that the two plans that you have from concept board, on the second one, you don't even have this building, no? Because it's so powerful, this sign, that well, we try to, well, it seems like then you realize that you needed to add more apartments and you just added them here, no? So why don't, for example, well, try to connect this somehow to that element here, like another kind of wing. So here, what I'm trying to do is also to make some other apartments also in this corner that will not only continue somehow this the shape, but also will allow you to have more other units, no? Well, there are just some thoughts trying to understand how to balance, to keep the same number of apartments, but at the same time to reduce the mass of the building. And another thing is kind of related with the ground floor, no? I think that if you go to the ground floor, and there maybe we can find also some other ideas of how to here. I think that this sign is very powerful, no, in general, but this other element here is so important, and this for Miralles is so important, this element, than this, no, than the spaces that you are creating. And here somehow it seems like they are kind of left over, no, that they are not in this case. Well, we can see that there are some elements, but there are some paths, in some cases are more central points, but there are not very strongly related also even with your building, no? That I think that maybe in the building, another way to reduce the mass, it can be if this ground floor is more lighter, no? Maybe everything with glass or something like that, so we can have more transparency. And also some, I don't know if an idea to introduce also some more apartments and also to give in this position more transparency will have been in some of these elements can start to extend, and they colonize, and they also help you to design maybe only on the ground floor part of those elements, at least to elaborate more the volume in the ground floor, just to control like Miralles is doing with this kind of light volumes, glass volumes, even in some cases, and you can even add maybe some apartments there, and also will help you to balance the idea of the massing in general of that element, and the number of apartments that you need to produce, no? And also to push, to stress a little bit more the idea of this ground floor, no, with the connection of the spaces that you are creating there.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely think that making it maybe a little bit lighter would be nice, especially in like my perspectives when I was, adding color and texture and things like that to them. Just having that completely concrete facade was what I had from the get-go, and then a later iteration was making those cores very light. But yeah, it's a very interesting idea to make the whole thing on the ground maybe a little bit more porous, which would go along with my whole theme very well as well.
So just, do we have a little bit more time, Carrie?
You sure do. You have about 5 minutes.
Well, so I just wanted to pick up on, kind of some of the comments I made early, and then some of David's great thoughts about, maybe varying the height of these pieces. And then and definitely I'm in total agreement with Ruben that, when a muralist does this, he's not really interested in the object. He's interested in the spaces that are made by these different kinds of configurations. So if you put all that together, I'm just wondering if, it might have been interesting to consider somewhat more straightforward, and I don't mean to make it quite that thin, kind of perimeter buildings that deal with my issue of meeting the street, you know, and addressing the street, that could be low, that could be, you know, just 2 or 3 story buildings, not a whole lot taller than the existing housing. And then you kind of break out with this, with your groovy swirly tower, right? In the center of the block, you would end up with even more outdoor spaces, I think, of different kind of interesting shapes and sizes and proportions. But that piece, because it's in the middle of the block, yes, you would see it, but it wouldn't be as much of an imposition, you know, from the street, especially because it's a layer back. It's like a layer within, and you have these kind of highly vegetated, you know, kind of gardens in between. So in other words, these outer pieces might only be 3 stories, and then this goes up to your 5-6 story piece, or maybe it's even 7 or 8 if you need to make up the difference. Because I don't think you wouldn't feel it as much if it was limited to the interior of the block. But you would get these kind of interesting glimpses of it too from the street. So you're not hiding it, but you are kind of, you're limiting its impact in a way to a couple of places where it sneaks up and sneaks through the edges, which could be another interesting strategy.
Yeah, it's actually funny that you say that, because we, in like the earliest stages of this project, you had to come with 3 ideas, and one of my 3 was this, and then another one was like a completely perimetered building. So it's just basically like combining those 2, which was very funny.
Get a little chocolate on your peanut butter and peanut butter on your chocolate.
If there aren't any other comments from the jury, I just want to say congratulations, Fiona. A lot of these comments I think we anticipated, so, you know, thank you for making.
Definitely. Thank you.
So we were prepared. But yeah, the height has been one of those challenges, and I think you brought it to a place where it's more feasible than it was before. And so I just commend you on the kind of the sheer iterations that you went through to get to where you are is why the project has such a great level of resolution. So thank you so much, Fiona. Congratulations, and I wish you the best of luck ahead.
Thank you so much.
So I'm going to slide out. I think Professor Vela has arrived. No, Professor Javert is arriving. Yep, there she is. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Hello, David and Wendy. How are you?
Hi.
Sorry
Margarita,
for the confusion.
I have to jump off for a quick phone call, and
on.
I'll just stay logged in and mute myself, but
Okay.
I have to take a phone call at 2,
Okay.
and then I'll be back.
Perfect. Who is the host here? Jamie, perfect. Wait 1 minute and exactly so we can. Simon, you can start in 1 minute or so, and to see if. We only see half of your face, Simon. Maybe. Yeah. Okay, good. That has been for the whole semester, but now the final, I think it will be good to have the whole face. Perfect.
Would it be okay if I moved some of my my drawings into a separate concept board so it was a little bit easier to see? Is it okay if I just drop that link in the chat?
But yes, sorry. Yes, drop it in the chat is perfect.
A little less hectic than the main board.
Okay, let's get started whenever you're ready.
for everybody? Y'all can hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, so hello, y'all. My name is Simone Golder, and I'm a first year grad student with Professor Robert. And I want to start off by saying thank you to the critics for being here today. We appreciate y'all taking the time to give us this feedback. Control L. Sorry, it's not full screen. Okay. So the title of this final project is La Vie, but looking back, we started this semester with the horizontal or patio home. Themes of porosity from this project are carried through to the intentional community. When positioning units onto the block, it has been important to leave ample green space for the various programs on the ground floor. Next, we began work on the vertical or tower home, and this design is used nearly as is to create the extra small units in the intentional community. Unit levels 3 and 4, I have a repeat in there, sorry, and then level 5. After that, we moved on to the sectional home, and this project was an exercise in condensing space, appropriate program distribution, and creating useful circulation around the different levels of this space. Here's the second floor. Gearing up to the community design, we began the porch project where we worked with several blocks of Palmer Avenue. We considered the relationship between public and private space and the porch's role as a semi-neutral barrier between the two. Porches carry a lot of significance in New Orleans, and this was something that was also considered moving into the intentional community. There are currently 19 homes and 2 businesses on this block, and it's near Sacred Heart High School. The 2 businesses and the 1 home have declined to be part of our redevelopment scheme. And here are a couple of images of the current block. This orange building is French Truck Coffee. Here are a couple of porches on Jenna Street, and yeah. So La Vie. This is the name I've chosen for this intentional community. It is a Louisiana French or Cajun French term, and it means an after-dinner visit with your neighbors. While this visit is still common today, its origins are pre-central air, so the house would be rather hot after a day of cooking, solar gain, what have you. So people would meet up with their neighbors outside in the porch area to kind of share each other's company. This togetherness and neighborliness was something that was very important to the design process. Voisinner is another word that was kind of important to that, and it's to be neighborly and to share food. This is parish of origin for these 2 words. You got Vermilion, Acadia, St. Landry, St. Martin, and Lafourche. This project is geared towards New Orleans creatives, so artists, musicians, and the type of folks who want to live around these people. La Vie is a multi-generational community with the hope of fostering mentorship between older and younger residents. There's a mix of rental and privately owned units, on-site childcare, communal amenities like large kitchens for shared meals, spaces for studios, sound-insulated practice rooms, and on-site instrument repair. Affordability factored into the design process. So there are student, family, and individual units to encourage an actually mixed income community. We learned about Eco Village in Utica, New York, and they brought up a $3,000 per unit road repair. And that's just really prohibitive to a lot of people. And one of the founders mentioned what they call the social justice fund to help lower income residents kind of afford these upgrades to the community. And to account for this in this particular community, the ground floor program includes stage and outdoor venue / festival space for community fundraising. So part of the proceeds from any event held on site would go towards this social justice fund. Looking at level 2, level 3, 4, and 5. So there are several unit sizes available in La Vie. This is the extra small unit. There are 18 of these units on the block, each at about 285 square feet, and they've been placed on the internal parts of the block as a hidden gem or bijou, while the more rectilinear units sit on the perimeter of the block. This is the small unit. These are roughly 575 square feet and have a private street-facing balcony. There are 8 of these units on the block. This is the medium unit size. These units were designed in a way that makes use of the balcony created on the lower floors, on the ground and 3rd floor. And there are 16 of these at 780 square feet with a 340 square foot balcony. And this is the large unit. These can be for a single family or split into rentals for students or people that just kind of want roommates. There are 22 of these units, 1,260 square feet, all with a private balcony, either street facing or kind of internal area facing. There are approximately 64 units on this block, and this number can go up or down by a few because of the rent by room potential of some of the units. It's a really simplified figure ground showing the public green space in the surrounding blocks. And with my little block outlined in red right here, followed by a green space diagram of the current and proposed conditions of the block. This diagram on this block, and you can see how the comfortable areas kind of shift throughout the day as the temperature rises inside of the house. This diagram shows the public, private, and collective spaces of the community. The ground floor has public amenities facing the street with private and collective spaces on the inside of the block. The second part of this, the L2 plus, shows how the vertical cores kind of take on a life of their own as you move up through the space. It's an elevation from Cadiz Street, and you can see the efforts to blend this community into the urban fabric of the area with the tallest buildings towards the center of the block. This is a section west facing and shows some little CAD musicians enjoying the space. Showing different times of the day. This is kind of a morning use perspective. This is the festival ground area on a sunny afternoon. And this is an evening view from one of the balconies on the lower right-hand corner of the block. Thank you.
Can you select one of the views of the overall project, either the plan or the axon or something?
And let's go to the ground floor here.
You didn't really talk about the derivation or goals of the cylindrical towers. Did you? I mean, other than that they're small units, that they don't. That doesn't necessarily mean they would be circulars. You know, so is there something that you were?
Came from my vertical project, and I reused the units from my vertical tower home. That was the reason behind that.
Can you describe a little bit more what you mean about this festival ground, which they're occupying, right? These are towers within pretty much everything but the edges, or is that?
Yeah, so I don't know if y'all can see my mouse right now, but it's all of these areas behind the steakhouse and in front of these three of the larger units here. So
is it all of this? In other words, is it everywhere inside of the orthogonal buildings on the edge, or is it not?
No, it starts, am I able to draw on this? I'm not really sure if I am or not.
If you go under Zoom view options, there's an annotate option.
It's like this area.
Okay. Can you just talk about that a little bit? Like, what do you see happening there? When you say festival grounds, I think of like big music festivals and like many, many, many acres of, you know, kind of farmland, and that, you know, like what, and then there's a stage somewhere, or there are multiple stages. What do you envision? How would this function?
Right. So my initial inspiration definitely came from things like Jazz Festival and Festival Acadian over in Lafayette. That this is obviously a lot smaller. Like you said, it's not this big sprawling ground. I just thought it would be nice to create an area where like the surrounding neighbors can also kind of come in and be involved with this space. So it's not tremendously large, but things like just concerts, food, art festivals, that type of thing. There's like Mac and Cheese Fest on Ferret Street. So I'm thinking kind of smaller scale festivals like that, where just the people living there can showcase their work and stuff like that.
Well, I'm totally in favor of the idea. I think it's a very potent concept, and it's very New Orleans, as you say. You know, they'll have a parade or a, you know, festival just about at the drop of a hat. You know? Yeah. So I think it's a great idea and really appropriate. I guess I feel like that it's such a powerful idea. I wish that to some degree, you're thinking about the whole site plan would kind of be, that idea would be coming through. And so that would include a few things in my opinion. One, it would involve maybe maximizing the open space in the interior of the block and at one edge. So that I think if you've heard me give any of these critiques, I've been pushing buildings to the street all day long anyway.
Yeah.
Should meet the street. But you know, so that would be one thing. Like, so if all of these kind of push to the edge, right? These guys, then that would leave more, presumably, you know, in other words, I'm just taking these kind of no man zones that aren't really adding much to your design. I'm pulling the buildings down to allow more room. And then frankly, I kind of think it would be interesting if these circular, whether they're circular or not, but that these studio apartments might actually be kind of penthouses that pop up on the roofs of these guys. You know, I think they actually might be more potent and they might make an interesting hybrid condition between, you know, the kind of standard orthogonal buildings and then these kind of interesting towers that pop up. I think that they'd be very popular too, because then they'd all have roof terraces and gardens. And then you totally free up the ground plane for your festival ground. So one, I think one thing that would make your festival idea both more kind of believable, viable, and obviously important to you, you know, it's clearly a priority, is A, to maximize that space and free it up from any other permanent structures.
Mm-hmm.
But then I would also really love to see, and maybe you've done it, but you just didn't draw it formally to show us, but I would love to see, you know, the kind of layout of temporary stages or tents or however you're imagining, you know, like I live just off Oak Street. And so, you know, the Oak Street, when they have the Po' Boy Festival versus the Oak Street on any other day of the week, is like, it's transformed completely, you know, and all of this infrastructure, these kind of, you know, these gates that block off the roads and these built up stages and the food trucks, they all kind of invade that space. And so it's like, if I were to draw a plan of Oak Street on a normal day versus on a Po' Boy Fest day, you know, I would see two very different looking site plans, right? So, I mean, I even think for your portfolio, I would definitely get more serious about if that's really where your project, you know, shines and comes to life. That's the community of your community VA housing, right? Then I would definitely want to be thinking about, you know, what does it look like when the festival is on?
Right.
How do you organize the space with these temporary tents, stages, structures, whatever? My husband and I do partner dancing, Cajun dancing, and so I hope you have a you know, a wooden platform somewhere for dancing.
Oh yeah.
You know, you have to think it through, like what do you need? What's the equipment of your music festival? But so those are my two takes, is that maximize that, you know, make it more literally central and a priority of your scheme by giving it plenty of unencumbered space, and then also showing us what does it look like when that event is going on, you know?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I would like to talk to you more about this Cajun dancing later too, but not time.
No problem.
Simone, in my case, I also appreciate that you have brought here the different typologies, no, different type of buildings for different situations, no, somehow, no. In my case, I think that if you can just go to another plan I have on another kind of plan.
Yeah.
The next one, for example, yeah, this one. No, I think here for me, I think that one of the strongest elements that I can see here are these houses. No, that also you have been very smart when you have drawn all these trees. No, because there are at the end they are like kind of trees. No, that then maybe on your axos and on your views you have forgotten to add trees, because I think that kind of tree house is really interesting. No, something like that. No. And also thinking on your idea of keeping as much space there as you can in the internal to have these kind of common areas for gathering a lot of people. I also agree that maybe you should use these other two that you are using, but stressing a little bit more these two typologies to control the perimetry, the limits of that area, trying to keep as much space as you can inside. Even here a little bit, if you just stress this, you just adjust, you can just maybe keep a little bit that there. But then I will also think that you should try to, or you can do two things. I think that you can add more of these kind of trees, but you should try to design their position. And by designing their position, I mean also that I think that you should not only think on the built elements, but something that Wendy was also kind of suggesting, but also thinking on the empty or not built elements. So imagine that you are going to build a couple of buildings kind of, well, here or here, and then you just leave some space for those gatherings. Not maybe just a continuous and big space, because at the end, you need to think on both things at the same time, on the housing, on the people that is going to live there and use always that space, but also on this kind of celebration moments. So thinking, and that's why I'm sure that you need to use for that more the ground floor, but I wanted to use this one because at the end here you can see maybe more clear the volume that I'm trying to talk about. Then because here at the end you just have like empty areas here and here, and a little bit kind of here. Then the rest are kind of populated with the trees, natural trees, and artificial trees, and I think that with both things, maybe like in a forest, thinking like, okay, I have a forest with some areas denser and some other areas maybe with a kind of void or something like that, where you can have this kind of open spaces for gatherings or for also for non-permanent structures that you can build and not build, and so on. But I think that if you stress a little bit more the idea of these trees, that would be good. Even I think that in the previous work, in the previous project, we talk about the height, the height of the building, and the previous student was working with 5, 6 even heights. And I think that in your case you just have 4 plus then the elevator that is reaching a higher one. I don't know if you can even reach, even in your case, because there are going to be very punctual elements. So even a little bit higher, I don't know if you have a limit, but at least these 5 or even 6, because also these spaces that you are creating here, these common spaces that these trays, that you are creating there in the house are very interesting. I don't know if they need to be always like 3 units, or you can add more, but that's another thing. But at least I think that maybe you can reduce a little bit these heights, and at the same time you can include more of this, so the balance, the number of units at the end, it can be the same, but you control with the limits the urban phase, and then here in the internal with these very longitudinal elements, okay, like trees, you can stress more that typology.
Right.
Maybe you could make me and Ruben happy by lifting them up higher and having the ground floor be those stages, right? So it's open. There's no unit on the lowest level of these built trees, these cylinders. They could be the stages for your music festival, right?
Yeah, that was something that you can something I was working towards, was leaving these little tree towers to where you have some open areas underneath. So that is definitely something that I've started to incorporate.
Can you go to the ground floor? I think with this, the idea of having, so those blocks are, as has been suggested, not to push them that way, because they're almost aligned but not aligned. So you either make them radically disaligned so that you're not having this problem of face to face here, or they are aligned but they do not touch, and you create a threshold of entrance at the ground floor level here. But there is a little bit of indecision in the way you are those things vibrate right now, which do not occur here. So it's a question perhaps of clarity, more clarity on your position architecturally, I think being one or the other, but not, is kind of in between. And perhaps with the ground floor, I mean, many options can be done, but the fact that the core is one thing, perhaps these bubbles are also in the ground floor more free-flowing, since everything is kind of open. And then above you have this more squared thing. So I wonder, again, it's a matter of deciding and being have more clarity on the diagram position, or the partie, if you want to call it this way, as we call it at the School of Architecture. So taking a stronger formal, because the soul is defined, no? The way and the atmosphere, all these things are in the narrative. I mean, you're coming from a written language, no? And you have defined this very well, and now you're kind of perfecting your spatial language and your formal language, and how that is more and more tuned to more precise. And I think those conversations help to kind of see possibilities of radicalization in a way.
Right, definitely.
Actually, the rooftops, whether or not the cylinders pop on top or not, are also obvious, potential stages, right, for the music. So you can kind of free up the ground floor for the food trucks and the, whatever tents selling brownies or lemonade. Well, what am I thinking? It's more like bars, the bar. Bars. And then the rooftops are kind of the event stages. That could be another interesting.
That is an interesting one. I hadn't even vaguely thought of moving that up top. That is very interesting.
Yeah, but if you're talking music festival, I would be thinking, well, where are those stages? Because that is that's a kind of a must programmatic element if that's the idea that you want to push forward. And I think it's a very compelling one. And like I said, very appropriate. I can see it,
What are these, Simone, what are these, sorry, these circles that you have here, these 3 circles?
Those were just kind of lobby areas for the tall central building. So it's like kind of a lobby hangout area.
Okay, because maybe also if you stress even more the idea of, okay, the buildings can be just the limit element, or the element that is controlling the limit, the urban facade, no? And then internally, I think that you can have a lot of space to play with the circles, no? In terms of small buildings, a small microtopography, a small even, I don't know, a lot of things to produce a lot of different kind of situation for that public space, no? Some benches, some I don't know, elements just to small bars, or some spaces that you can rent to do, I don't know. You can have the scene that we were talking, maybe just one big, because you are working with also with different kind of circle, because here I can see not only that, but also the trees. So I can see that you have a lot of potentiality there to play just with some circles and to stress more that idea of the common spaces, and at the same time these 3 towers or these 3 houses that you have.
Right.
Margarita put in the chat that she's leaving and we should consider transitioning to Josiah's project. Do you have any final questions, Simone, or did we get your juices flowing a little bit?
Y'all did. I'm walking away with some very interesting ideas for how to push this further and how to kind of catch my drawings up to my concept.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is,
you weave a very compelling web or set of images and kind of atmosphere with your words. You're very successful with that, and I agree with Marguerite. I mean, it takes time to transition to a visual language, but you've been to many festivals, or you would have been pushing this as the central idea for your, so you know what they look like, and you know how the furnishings of those kinds of spaces, and so making those present, would really make your scheme as visually compelling as it is from your description.
Right.
Neat. Good work.
Thank you all so much for the feedback. This was fun.
Thank you. Well, as Wendy was saying, maybe we can just start with Joshua. Yeah.
Is it Josiah? Is that, do I have it right?
Yeah.
Actually, since we don't, are we getting a host? I wouldn't mind a.
Sonsores will come, but I guess that she's stuck with another student in another room.
I mean, I wouldn't mind a 3-minute break if we can afford it. Should we or should we not? Should we just forge ahead?
Kind of the time. I guess I'm the timekeeper. I think that's fine. We're ahead of schedule.
Literally 3 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
What is happening here, Brittany? Are we in a break?
Yeah, I took a 3-minute break, but we're good on time.
Okay.
Okay. I don't know if I should.
Oh, I'm talking and I'm muted. I was going to tell Phyllis that David is on a phone call. So Ruben and I are the reviewers at the moment, and we're back and we're ready. If you want to proceed.
Okay, I'll go ahead and start then. Give me 1 second. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Josiah Ramirez. I'm a second-year undergraduate student in Professor Sensola's Vella's section. The title of this project is Pixelate, seen here in axonometric view with context of the site. Pixelate evolved from the horizontal and vertical and sectional homes designed in the first half of the semester. The horizontal and vertical home designs incorporated the concept of building blocks and stacking and joining them to create both private and community spaces. The sectional home elevates the concept of creating these spaces with building blocks by introducing the dichotomy between addition and subtraction. Pixelate then takes the form of the sectional home using a grid to add or subtract forms from the original home to create this pixelated geometry. The site consists of the entire block where Dryades, Caddis, Jenna, and Barone streets intersect in Uptown New Orleans. This 9-block site plan shows the surrounding neighborhood where Pixelate will be in the center. This block plan shows the original buildings on the immediate site, where 3 immovable buildings given as constraints restrict the project's footprint. In the southern end, a normal residence. In the northwestern corner, French Truck Coffee. And in the northeastern corner, Charlie's Steakhouse, as well as Hudson and Sala Art Conservation Studios. Pixelate consists of a central square structure nestled into the rectangular space created by the restricted buildings in the southeastern corner, with 2 extensions parallel and semi-adjacent to the aforementioned buildings along the northern and western edges. This axonometric gives a glimpse of the proposal within the site showing the 3 proposed structures. Pixelate takes the form of an urban cultural center, where visual and performing artists are given the opportunity to create, cultivate, and celebrate. Whether elevating one's artistic skill in the many artistry studios, teaching a new skill to the community's youth in the children's workshops, perusing a fine exhibit in the art gallery, or enjoying a performance on the central stage, Pixelate elevates the current generation of artists and welcomes the next. The project takes precedent from the Sax and Pixel, both designed by MVRDV architects, as well as the Instituto Andaluz de Biotecnología, designed by Sol 89. The juxtaposed vocabulary of the pixelated facade and the rectangular bridge flows into Pixelate through its concept of addition and subtraction, creating voids of extensions that pierce out of the basic rectangular form, in contrast with the community spaces following the perfectly rectangular form. The design separates 2 main portions of the ground and the exterior. In the primary building, the central stage is surrounded by several private artistry studios for adults outlined in blue, of which residents may reserve for a certain amount of time. Along the outside of the same building, outlined in green, is a similar cluster of artistry spaces, but rather for children, where they may take part in workshops or simply practice and develop their skill. More specifically, the smaller artistry studios are separated by program, where green is for painters, blue for musicians, and yellow for sculptors. The stage in the center is used for performing artists, where dance and theater performances or training may occur. The axis begins on the ground floor, where no living spaces are available. Primarily for community spaces, the ground floor also contains the entrances to the vertical cores, which one enters into a lobby equipped with mailboxes and a lounge area that will allow access for residents to get to the living spaces above. Each vertical core gives access to 2 units, whether a living space and a community space, 2 living spaces, or 2 community spaces. As previously mentioned, the ground floor is explicitly for community or public use, where most of the amenities in the design live. Alongside the private artistry studios, residents may also find a children's workshop, an instrument store rental and repair, an art supply store, a wood and metal working studio, an art gallery, a community library, a gym, and extra retail space. Some of the ground floor amenities continue into the second floor as living spaces are also introduced, all accessed by the vertical cores spread throughout. In addition to the ground floor amenities that extend up, a community daycare above the children's workshop and an additional workshop space for adults can be found as well. The typical floor plan begins on the 3rd floor, where the living spaces become more uniform, represent the aspect of subtraction and removal to create voids or terraces. The 4th floor continues on the same path, but instead focuses on the aspect of addition, where pieces that were removed from the 3rd floor concept then are replaced and added as extensions on the 4th floor as box-like terraces or a modernized bay window. In section, Pixelate continues with the concept of addition and subtraction, where ceilings are being manipulated to cross through floors, creating double or even triple heights within community spaces, as well as the terraces along each of the facades, adding a push and pull effect in the z-axis of the design. You can also see the introduction of more community spaces highlighted in green, such as private office spaces for residents, a community pool, a dance studio, and community greenhouses along the rooftops of the north and south edges. This perspective shows the experience from a terrace on the 4th floor, highlighting the addition and subtraction in terraces being pushed into the unit or out as box windows. This perspective shows the opposite, where you can see the voids and extensions up above, yet focusing on the way the ground floor is being inhabited. Pixelate contains around 65 units for living, with around half being large typologies, a quarter small, and a quarter medium. Each vertical core gives access to one large living space on nearly every floor. As previously discussed, each unit was derived from the sectional home, which created a uniform grid easily manipulated by adding or subtracting spaces to create 3 different typologies, keeping a similar geometry with the addition and subtraction of voids or extensions. The small unit consists of 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom at approximately 500 square feet with a smaller living room, kitchen, and a dining room that becomes an extension of the kitchen. The medium-sized unit consists of 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms at approximately 900 square feet, with the terrace accessible through the living room that can create an extension of that space, as well as a private terrace for the primary bedroom. Finally, the large unit includes 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms at approximately 1,250 square feet. The kitchen and dining rooms both have extensions through terraces for outdoor dining or leisure, with all rooms and spaces accessed through a central corridor that runs through the middle. Thank you.
What are the pieces in the courtyard? Those 1-story-ish looking bunker type pieces. In the court, yeah, in the not
these.
In the middle of the courtyard, not the ones that are under the rest of the building, but these in the center.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, these right here.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So these, alongside these, are like small artistry studio spaces. So they're just private for residents who want to either practice or just continue their art along through the day. So it's kind of a way for residents to just continue their skill and, you know, either skills, jobs, hobbies, stuff like that. But just giving them a private space alongside the rest of the larger community spaces.
I think it's a nice idea. I mean, the theme and the programming, it's a really nice idea. It's very compelling. And I think you clearly thought a lot about what would you need, not just the obvious things, but, you know, having an art shop and things like that. It could even be a kind of a economic generator, right? That because people have to man the art shop and so on and so forth. Can you go to the perspective that shows the courtyard? I am a little skeptical whether those studios need to be freestanding, really kind of taking up the central space of the courtyard. I feel like those 2 ideas are kind of at odds with each other. And I notice, especially in this perspective, it's most obvious to me that you have a fair amount of kind of understory between these other, you know, those other larger pieces, the kind of public commercials, but, you know, whether it's the art studio or the art shop or, you know, et cetera. Like, I don't remember them all, but you had quite a few. I just think I would pull those things out of the courtyards just because it's kind of like you go to all the trouble to make. It's a little bit like if you've been with us in this whole afternoon session, it's a little bit like, I think it was was it Chris who had the domes, the tops on his courtyards? Was it Chris or was it Frank? Am I getting it right? At any rate, it's kind of like you create a courtyard and then you kind of negate it by either covering it or putting stuff in it and filling it so that you don't really get a sense of the courtyard as a communal space, as a space that you could really, yes, you can have little groupings of people, just like you're showing in this rendering, that meet in smaller groups in and among, in between the artist studios, but you really can't have a kind of a larger event, public lecture or a public performance. You've taken your one big kind of outdoor landscape space for gathering, and you've kind of chopped it up into lots of little pieces. And so I question that move, even though I love your project. I mean, everything about it. We've been talking all day about how to, provide a kind of moderate and resolve the discrepancy between the scale of a lot of the multi-unit housing buildings versus the neighborhood. And I think, your pixelate idea goes a long way to doing that. You breaking it down, the massing of these buildings and the kind of the monumentality of some of them. So I love the idea on the building's surfaces. I just don't know if the ground needs to sprout these things in the two main courtyards where you actually could have a kind of a larger collective community event, So that's one of the quibbles.
The one thing I would say, I mean, I don't disagree, but maybe it's just not as many, right? Because I do think that what I really like about this floor plan on the ground level is that it really kind of creates these like boulevards through the property, right? And you're sort of weaving in some of this community space and some retail and stuff like that. It really starts to make the street potentially pull itself in and allow sort of this, to kind of cross through this thing and really kind of generate and make it, maybe a real beacon for the community, not only the community of the building and the occupants there themselves. So I really kind of appreciate that. And I agree with Wendy, maybe that I think that there could be use for some of those. Maybe there's too many in that one particular courtyard there that doesn't then allow maybe for some larger gatherings spaces or events or something like that. But I do really appreciate that sort of like from every angle and every street, I might be able to kind of weave myself through this and really, let this ground plane become, a part of the community. And I just think that there's something really successful about that. And I do also agree that there is something, when I look at the axon, there is something about the scale of this building. I think the scale of the project in the community is always something, a scale of this scale in a residential neighborhood is really hard. But I think the way you have kind of your strategy of this modulation that you've got on the facades really brings that sort of residential scale even to the larger scale of the building. And I think in some ways you've really kind of succeeded in kind of bringing that residential scale individually to the facades and how it relates to the surrounding buildings and its context. So I would like to see, and maybe I'm just not either seeing in the axon, I almost want to see some more perforations on the lower level and see that thing really kind of open itself up to the street on all those where you're like really blurring the boundary of that street and the access boulevards, if you will, that you're creating through this project. I mean, you've got some retail spaces that are in these courtyards where you're really pulling people in, which I think is really successful.
Yeah, I would like just to continue with the telling you that this idea of the pixelation, I think that is very appropriate. No, I think that is successful, especially when we see the upper floors. No, I think that you have worked a lot on the upper two floors, and there is where we can really see that level of pixelation that you were you were working, no? And I think that, well, I agree that the ground floor maybe is not as work as the other floors, but maybe because there is not a very clear strategy, no? If the strategy is again to continue with the pixelation, maybe the pavement should be in a different way, or maybe you want just to play with a different kind of idea there. Maybe it can be also, it could have been also interesting. So you will highlight the pixelation on the buildings, and there another scene. Another way also to build to play with the pixelation is not only with volumes. Again, you can just have small micro topography, or even just the pavement, because here you have a kind of pavement that at the end is kind of highlighting this courtyard situation. In the other cases, is just making kind of big pixels, so it's not very clear, no? So I think that that the ground floor needs a clear also strategy. Either the pixelation we will continue. I'm sure that Sonsoles will have talked about Baracaldo Plaza in Spain, or maybe with the micro topography that I was just talking about with 2+1, also in Spain, that you have like carved situations more than always volume situation, no? And also I think that then also the facade, even the volume, I think that, as David was mentioning, the scale is kind of related what we can just find there, and you inserted the project correctly. I think that the idea of the pixelation is a little bit lost also there on the different volumes. It seems like for you is like the just that band, and then there's the pixelation is kind of popping out, no, but not inwards. And you have also some inward situation that you can also play with some terraces, no, that can be also kind of highlighted with the pixelation, or maybe with the materiality. I guess that is just because of a lack of time, no? But here that kind of level of pixelation that we can see on the plans, especially on the upper floors, is missed also a little bit here, no? And also and this idea, I mean, with this idea of pixelation that somehow you have on the upper parts, but a little bit shy, no? When you start to shape the volume, maybe a little bit harder in some cases, even also on the lower part to open more. Those days could have been some ideas to to explore again, and maybe could have helped you to understand more this volume as a small as a big volume, but it's composed but small volumes, no? But these pixels, these 3D pixels, no? Anyway, I think that it's a very nice idea.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think if the artist studios, you would lose them unless you put them somewhere else. But if they were lower to the ground and they either they're occupiable, but they're depressed at a lower level, and so on the ground floor they could be either benches, large benches, or they could be little mini stages or something like that. I would feel much more. I would feel they were more appropriate, and they wouldn't so cut up the space. But I agree with Ruben that it makes sense that they would be part of this larger kind of ground floor grading plan, right? That has pavers that sometimes they pop up, sometimes they pop down. Maybe you have reflecting pools in some of those pixelated moments, right? But that it's part of a very well thought out kind of continuous paving pattern, for lack of a better word, or pattern on the ground plane. And sometimes they press up and sometimes they press down, depending on, what's going on there. But I think that could be incredibly exciting. And it would also help to, I think right now you have three very distinct parts of your project. And I think that activation of the ground plane is a complete, like a mat, from street to street to street to street, could really tie together, not just in the courtyard spaces, but throughout the ground floor, ground plan, could really tie all of the pieces of your project together into a much more kind of unified whole, if that makes sense. You kind of, they're all going to exist then in this pixelated world that you've created that starts from the ground and then goes up from there. I guess the only other thing I wonder about, and it's a definitely a wonder, not a more of a question than a comment. I just wonder if you ever considered right now, you know, the pixelation, the perforations, and the projections and depressions on the surface, they kind of go all the way around each of the buildings. And I'm wondering if you ever thought about doing it, you know, kind of restricting that to the street side and then, or the outside, and then have a much more, a different kind, a more sheer condition on the inside face, or vice versa. You know, did you experiment with that at all?
Yeah, so actually I have a pixel here up on the top right, which has this kind of cascading pixelated inward facade. And then on the exterior facade, you have these flat just elevations. And I did think about that, but I think I was more drawn to the sacks on the left side, creating that pixelated form and as much as possible in elevation, in section, in plan. And, you know, I was just drawn more into that idea. But I did think about if I could do something like that, I could like, you know, do something similar to Pixel where there's a cascading effect on one side and a completely different vocabulary on the other.
It would make a stronger distinction between being inside and outside, if that matters, you know, or street side versus interior block side.
And I think you're drawing the one, it's a section drawing where the colors, right there.
This one.
Yeah. So that's like really informative of part of your strategy, right? I mean, it's got a lot of like, you're very deliberate about where the community spaces are, where the housing spaces. And I'd like to see more of those studies because those were very informative to the way in which you probably created your elevations and certainly the way you created your plans. But, you know, that drawing right there seems really, really informative to your strategy. But I'm not, I want to understand. So I think even your exploration and diagram in that on all the elevations and sections is also going to continue to reinforce the idea because it's very deliberate. But, you know, just when I'm looking around your drawings, all of them being provocative and nice, I think that drawing to me starts to really talk about what you're doing and how these spaces are, you know, intertwining with each other and crossing over each other and stuff like that. And so I want to see more of that in your evolution to how you got where your final form, you know?
Yeah, I was actually quite relieved, if I can use that word, and happy and excited when I saw this this section, because it makes it clear that all of those projections and perforations are actually, I think, spatial conditions. They're not just, you know, kind of a fenestration, you know, gimmick or something.
Yeah, they're not applied. They're
They actually reveal a variety of spatial conditions inside the building. And to the extent that they do that, I think that's really where you want to be.
Yeah. So more of those kinds of diagrams, I think, because they clearly informed you on what, you know, drove the final form of the building. So don't let go of those. Let those really become even more expressive in your process, because first of all, it's going to help us even more to understand your strategies there. But I know there was a lot of thought that went into that.
I completely agree with all the feedbacks, Josia. It's true that this section is a kind of diagram. So we would like to see your porosity, the pixelation, not only the program, so how you combine them, as you have selected to go more with the SACS envelope or facade, how that porosity or transparency goes through the street to the courtyard. So I think that your idea has a lot of room to explore, and I think that you are going to improve from here until Monday, right? Because we have a weekend and you can also finish your work. Huh?
Right.
Thank you very much for your comments.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Guys, I have seen that Andrea is here, so we need to move to the next one. I need to leave. I'm so sorry for that. I think that Brittany, I will follow your project on YouTube. All the best. And thank you, David and Wendy, for this wonderful afternoon and conversation. Thank you. See you.
Thank you,
Ruben. Thank you, Ruben.
See you.
Thank you to all the students. Great work. Congratulations. Bye-bye.
Hi, David. I haven't seen you before, so I take this little time to say hi.
Good morning. My name is Brittany Crawford, and my professor for this semester was Professor Andrea Bardon de Tena. I'm trying to move to the next slide. Maybe I have to click. Okay. The typologies for this project were birthed from earlier projects within the course, consisting of the horizontal home, the vertical home, and the sectional home. The image on the screen highlights the 9-block site in which we were assigned a particular block to design our communal homes on. In this image, at the urban scale of 1/1000, there's the opportunity to see the focal blocks of this particular project. Upon visiting the site, it was learned that there was a neighboring school, Academy of the Sacred Heart. It was then deemed necessary that if there is going to be a school built directly across from the community must have something to offer to the children. This is where a lot of the inspiration for the ground floor program comes from. Analysis of the site meant analysis of the city in which the designer was born and raised. So creating interactive spaces unique to the city of New Orleans was a heavy driver for this project. Intentional community goals. WEDAT Housing Community is a community with 4 main goals: to make outside city dwellers feel welcome and accepted, to reflect the surrounding area, to work against undetermined flooding of the streets of New Orleans, and to essentially be thermally comfortable and suitable for the heat and humidity of New Orleans. WEDAT's top priority is to not change the community or exclude natives. The goal is rather to further create unification in the neighborhood in which it was designed. In this plan drawing, we get the opportunity to see the ground floor elements and how they are occupied. The goal of this calmer, labeled Poche plan drawing is for viewers to see exactly what the pieces of program are. It is important to note how this drawing frames the intentional gardens of various sizes which were designed to collect water that falls from the open air corridor pockets above. Floors 2 and above are where all of the units are placed. The complex is composed of 63 total units, 21 per floor. Each floor is repeated. The next 3 slides present zoomed in images of the units. These slides allow the viewer to see the relationship between one unit and another. It also presents the repeated vertical core package of 1 set of straight run stairs and an elevator. The package is assigned to every 2 to 3 units. This image frames a more detailed plan view of each of the 4 typologies. On the south side of the complex, there is a private balcony on each residential floor. These balconies are lined with plants and other greenery. With this balcony, the community is essentially protecting itself from the south sun. The diagrams on this page represent access. Drawing your focal point to the top image, areas of shade are notable in this project. Beneath these shaded spots is where many outdoor seating areas are placed. As represented in the bottom left diagram, areas without shade are also highly notable in this project because they are where the gardens are placed. Rainwater from the openings above lands directly in the gardens that are planted with adapted to trees, which are known to be extremely useful in water absorption. These gardens are intended to assist with flood water. In the southeast and southwest isometric views of the project, you can start to imagine access patterns as well as height relations to the surrounding blocks. The first perspective is an interior view of the Boys and Girls Club that is located directly across from the existing school. Here, the view sets itself on the third floor of the south side balcony. The view is positioned on the west facing the east. Another view of the balcony, but from the ground level at the southeast point of view. A view within the community highlighting the adapted to trees, the cast iron fences and balcony, and most importantly, the gardens. Each unit works on a system of cross ventilation, which is a method of cooling that this community can certainly benefit from, given the high summer temperatures in New Orleans. This idea of cross ventilation can be useful during weather events where power outages are common in the city. Cross ventilation in plan. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I just explained it.
Hey, Brittany, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Having a little reunion here. I'm getting to see some of my former students. Nice. Yeah. So those rectilinear forms in the landscape, are those benches or pools? What's going on in those spaces that are on the ground level?
These are the gardens, and in each garden is a tree planted, which is represented with the plus signs.
Okay. So they're planters, and you maybe use it as a bench around the edges or something like that?
Yes, you can also use them as seating areas along the steps.
Nice. Well, to me, this project is another one that I believe handles scale really, really well. I think that you've got a sense of the scale of the kind of site contextual family of single houses that are around. You know, that you're very clear about how your buildings are kind of following that scale of the unit of your buildings, not in any kind of imitative way, but you clearly have learned from the scale of those and implemented them. I really like your outdoor space. On one level, you can read it as one continuous space, even though it's not a pure geometrical form where it's like, you know, clearly a square or rectangle, but it does have a sense of including those three kind of sub landscape gardens into one larger one that I think is incredibly successful. I think that your drawings are really beautiful. I kind of wish, if there's any kind of anything that I would say could use a little bit more work, it would probably just be the renderings of the project, because I think the way that you're depicting, there's such delicacy and nuance in your plans and your other line drawings. And I feel like in some of the renderings, we've seen this a lot actually today. I think it's kind of a good thing, I think, because often you see these incredible renderings and then there's no plan, or, you know, a plan that doesn't make any sense, or the actual spaces of the building don't live up to these illustrations of architecture. They're not really architecture. So if you had to have one or the other, I'd rather see really strong, you know, kind of architectural drawings. But at the same time, I think that in many cases, and I think in your case, this is one where I just feel that the renderings could really use another pass. But your project deserves more evocative renderings. You know what I mean?
Yes, ma'am. I know what you mean.
I would totally agree, because I think that there is something about the one rendering that I'm really intrigued by is the rendering with the railings and that courtyard rendering, because I do agree. I think the quality of that space at the ground level is really interesting, but there's a level of detail in that one particular rendering that is more like evocative of the sensibilities that you're after, but I don't see it anywhere else. I mean, I think that the railings and the fences in the garden and stuff like that are really like a very emphatic kind of deliberate response to the context and the neighborhood and being in New Orleans and all that, and it's so important, but I only see it in one spot. And I think there's some so I'm missing a little bit of that, and I agree that I think that rendering is maybe my favorite of your project, but I don't see it anywhere else, and I really want that exploration to come out throughout your project, because the axon, while I understand what's going on in the building, I don't feel like it has that contextual sensibility that I believe your project really has. So I get a little nervous about that drawing in comparison to that. So there's some threads that I'm not seeing through a bunch of the other illustrations that you have, albeit provocative and interesting. But I'm really intrigued by a couple of them, and then I feel like I lose it in some of the other ones. So I think Wendy's right on with that, because I think there's a lot more thought. There's clearly a lot more thought in the way you've organized this and the way you've integrated this into the community. And I think there's a splash of thought of how you think this building is going to be, but I think there's a lot more there that hasn't been pulled out via pencil and or computer or whatever you're using.
Yeah, that one, the one rendering or perspective that you identified, David, is definitely the best one, and the rest should be a lot more like that, I think. And the thing that's interesting is I don't think it's that you didn't think about these things, because there is rendering, and if you look at the ground plan, you can see you've thought through these kind of intricacies of various types of space making elements, from trees to kind of raised level platforms, to the gates and the fences and the balconies. It's just, there's a lot going on in this plan that just hasn't made, I'm sure it's in your mind's eye, but when you get to the three-dimensional drawings, it's just not on the page yet, except for that one.
And maybe it doesn't even need to be that it's so, I mean, I think that can be taken as a way of being like, well, you got to figure out all the building. Well, yeah, that's a big task, right? But what I like about that in particular image is that, so the background of the images is still that black and white pencil drawing, if you will. I know it's not pencil, but it was in my time. But that kind of drawing with an overlay of the railings and things like that. And maybe that kind of sort of patchwork of rendering, rather than like it having to be that full-blown rendering, can exist on your other drawings to kind of give that sensibility throughout the rest of your presentation that would make that rendering equal on all the rest of your drawings, I think, or at least all your perspective drawings and elevations and sections is too. So maybe it's not so much like, hey, work it all out and have it all, but you take these splashes like you've done in that drawing and let that sensibility in that drawing find its way into the rest of your presentation. I think it would sell your idea way more than you're doing right now. So I think that would help a lot. Because the drawing, as I'm looking at your boards, even the sections next to that rendering, like I'm not really getting too much. I mean, I see a little bit, but those sections are, they're a little blank, they're a little empty, and they don't tell the story. And so that those sections are not telling. I mean, one section, the upper section is telling me more than the lower section, I think. But even some splashes of that kind of patchwork rendering through those would help. to make those come alive.
No, she's smiling. I think she knows. She's like that. Yeah, I just didn't get to that part, right?
Right. Yeah, that's always the, you know, the reviewers say, hey, do more. And they're like, ah.
It's much better that it's clear that you thought it through and that you were inspired. You know, some of the images that you showed of New Orleans, you know, at the beginning, you're picking up and interpreting some of those cues of the texture of the city at the level of the texture, right? And so I think, you know, it's absolutely was in your whole way of thinking about the project. And so that's why I say, you know, your project deserves better renderings in a way, just because I know it's there. I know it's in your mind. I know it's not like an accident. You actually intended it. And I think if that level of detail and design could permeate all the drawings a little bit more, it just be very, very powerful. But it's a really nice project, and it's so obvious that you get New Orleans, you know. That comes across really strongly.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Good work.
Can I say one thing?
Yeah, of course.
I absolutely love how you guys pointed out the perspective, because my professor was telling me, you need to work more in line. You need to work more in line. And for you guys to point that out, I like it. And I should have worked more in line. That lets me know for next time. So thank you guys.
Well, remember too, that like in these things, you're telling a story, right? You're telling a story of what your ideas are for this project and all the threads. So you have to learn how to be able to tell that story. And you're learning a lot of like how to draw, how to do all these kinds of things. But at the end of the day, you're out selling a story, you're selling an idea, and you're selling, you know, some designs, and you have to be able to communicate those. So you have to step back into yourself to be like, where's my story, and what are the tools that I'm using to tell that story? And in this case, you're doing it through a series of drawings and renderings and things like that. But you know, you want to be able to learn how. That's what you're doing. You're learning how to tell that story and sell that story ultimately.
I mean, sometimes the story is that it's, you know, it's all about being very sheer and diagrammatic and bare bones. I mean, that could be the story, you know, and then those are the kinds of drawings you should have. But that's clearly not what's in your mind. And I think that what's in your mind and what shows in some of these plan drawings is far more appropriate to New Orleans. You know, I've actually said on a lot of the other projects, wow, I really admire your site plan. You know, your site idea is really clear, your unit's really great, you know. But I'm not getting the feel of the imagery, you know, or there's something missing in terms of the sensibility of the neighborhood, the sensibility of the New Orleans context that seems, you know, like, is this building belong here, you know? And I think that you've got that. So that's why we're really wanting to be able to permeate all of your documents, because it's clearly there and it needs to be there. And it hasn't been throughout the day, I would say. That's one of the things that's been most.
But I would also say that it's important to be, because some of the imagery that you have, like the other renderings, are not telling your story, and so they can detract from it too. So you have to be very deliberate about it too. So I don't think some of the other imagery, like I appreciate I appreciate the rendering with the food trucks and stuff like that. I don't think that's your best foot forward. That's not, to me, telling the story that you're after. So you also have to be very deliberate too in what you're putting forward. So make sure that you're that they're completing your story, I guess, if we stay on that theme.
Yeah, the issue with the food trucks one, you want to pull that up, to me, is that like the food trucks can't save you. It's like the food truck, okay, that's fine, but then the architecture behind it looks so stark and anonymous. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So some people in food trucks don't do it. You need it in the building. You need it in the architecture. Because those food trucks are going to come and go, you know. And they actually make it seem like the scale of your building is off, you know, because that ground floor wall looks really high compared to a food truck. And it seems like maybe the food trucks are too small in the rendering. I'm not sure how high that wall is.
But I think the food trucks are a part of like the pulling of the community together. So there is something to that is provocative there.
I just think don't make up for a lack of texture and detail in your building itself.
Totally. I totally agree.
Cool. Do you have anything else, Brittany? Any questions or thoughts or?
Well, thank you guys. I think the feedback was very useful, and I definitely will stay on a system next time for when I'm presenting my pictures to sell it better, because I want to sell it better. Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, you know, we can see it, and that's why we're talking about where we see it and where we don't see it. So that's good. You know, just to need more consistency of that across the board. Are we done early?
Yes, I think we are done a little bit early. Thank you so much for your comments, and Brittany for your presentation. I think we are going to meet. I'm going to copy the link again at 5:30 in the room 0. So
okay.
Just to make it easier, I will copy here the link.
Thank you. So we'll have a little break between now and 5:30.
Yes, I think so.
There's a different link to go to?
Yes, we are meeting with Margarita and with the other sections in that one.
I see.
And we are going to put the thoughts from all across the rooms.
Okay, and that's in 10 minutes or so?
Yes, it
Great.
should be at 5:30.
Okay.
Maybe 5 minutes before or something like that.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
See you there.